The massive space station floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal city. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports every hour. Inside the station, thousands of aliens walked through wide corridors, buying and selling goods from across the galaxy. The air buzzed with the sounds of 100 different languages and the hum of advanced technology. Captain Tai Min stood perfectly still in his dark green military uniform. His black boots were polished to a mirror shine, and his back was straight as a steel rod. Beside him stood Colonel Jin Woo, his commanding officer and the leader of Earth Defense Force Special Operations. Both men had trained for years to reach this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. This was humanity, first official meeting with the Galactic Military Council. Earth had only made contact with alien civilizations 3 years ago when a damaged scout ship crash landed in the Korean mountains. The pilot had been rescued by human soldiers, and in return for their kindness, had shared the location of this trading station. Now humanity wanted to join the galactic community and prove they could contribute to maintaining peace across the stars. The station corridor where they waited was enormous. The ceiling stretched up 50 feet above their heads and was decorated with glowing symbols from different alien cultures. Shops lined both sides of the walkway, selling everything from exotic foods to advanced weapons. Taemin watched as a group of tall, thin aliens with silver skin examined energy rifles, while nearby a family of short, furry creatures bought colorful fruits that seemed to glow from within. Most of the aliens stopped to stare at the two humans. Some pointed and whispered to their companions. Others took pictures with small floating devices. Taemin had expected this reaction. Humans were still completely new to galactic society, and most species had never seen one in person before. The stares did not bother him much. What bothered him was the way some aliens looked at them. There was no curiosity or friendliness in those looks. Instead, he saw dismissal and contempt. To these advanced civilizations, humans appeared to be nothing more than primitive creatures from a backward world. Colonel Jin Woo checked his watch and straightened his uniform jacket. The meeting was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. Representatives from the Calarian Empire would arrive soon to discuss humanity joining a joint military operation against space pirates who had been attacking trading ships. The Calarians were one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds, and their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Their soldiers were legendary fighters who had never lost a major battle. If humanity could prove worthy to fight alongside them, it would establish Earth as a serious player in galactic politics. A commotion at the far end of the corridor announced the arrival of the Calarian delegation. The crowd of aliens immediately moved aside to create a clear path. Even species that normally showed no fear stepped back respectfully when they saw who was approaching. General Vextar led the procession like a conquering hero returning from victory. He stood 7 feet tall with bright blue scales that covered his entire body. His 4 arms moved in perfect coordination as he walked, and his yellow eyes surveyed everything around him with the confidence of someone who had never met his equal. Golden armor covered his chest and shoulders, while a cape made from some exotic material flowed behind him. Behind the general marched 20 Calarian elite soldiers. Each warrior carried a plasma rifle that hummed with deadly energy. Their armor was polished to perfection, and their movements were precise as clockwork. They looked like an army of blue-scaled robots built for one purpose: destroying enemies. The general stopped directly in front of the two humans. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His scaled face showed no emotion, as his yellow eyes studied them like a scientist examining insects under a microscope. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough for everyone in the corridor to hear clearly. "So, these are the famous Earth warriors," he said in broken galactic standard, the common language used for trade and diplomacy. His accent was thick, and he spoke slowly as if the words tasted bad in his mouth. "They look even weaker than I imagined. How can such small, soft creatures possibly help us fight pirates? The crowd around them grew larger as aliens stopped their business to watch what was clearly becoming an interesting confrontation. Merchants abandoned their stalls, and travelers changed direction to get a better view. Soon, over 100 different beings were gathered in a circle around the humans and Calarians. Colonel Jin Woo maintained his military bearing despite the obvious insult. His face remained calm and professional as he replied, "General Vextar, we appreciate the opportunity to prove ourselves. Our Special Air Service has extensive experience in unconventional warfare, and we believe we can contribute significantly to your operations against the pirates." The general threw back his scaled head and laughed. The sound was harsh and unpleasant, like metal scraping against stone. Several aliens in the crowd joined in with their own forms of laughter, creating a chorus of mockery that echoed through the station corridor. "Experience," he repeated, still chuckling. "You have experience fighting other primitives on your little mud ball planet. This is real warfare, human. This is combat between civilizations that have mastered faster than light travel and energy weapons. Your species still uses chemical propellant firearms and metal vehicles that roll on rubber wheels." More aliens gathered to watch the spectacle. Word was spreading quickly through the station that something entertaining was happening in Corridor 7. Shopkeepers closed their doors temporarily, and even the station security personnel stopped their patrols to observe. Tae-min felt heat rising in his cheeks, but kept his expression neutral. The general words stung because they contained enough truth to be genuinely hurtful. Human technology was primitive compared to what he saw around him every day on this station. But technology was not everything, and combat was about more than just having the best weapons. Colonel Jin Woo tried to redirect the conversation away from the growing confrontation. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private," he suggested diplomatically. "I am sure we can find common ground and work together effectively against our mutual enemies." Why, the general voice grew even louder as he played to his audience. "Are you ashamed of your species? Are you embarrassed to let everyone see what passes for soldiers among the humans?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. Aliens held up recording devices to capture whatever came next. Some were already broadcasting live to their home worlds, turning this diplomatic meeting into galactic entertainment. General Vextar stepped forward until he was directly in front of Tae-min. The human soldier could smell the alien breath and see his own reflection in those cold yellow eyes. The general raised one of his 4 arms high above his head and, without any warning, brought it down in a vicious slap across Tae-min's face. The sound of scaled flesh striking human skin echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped instantly. Even the background noise of the station seemed to quiet as hundreds of beings witnessed something that had never happened before in galactic diplomatic history. Tae-min's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. Pain exploded across his cheek and jaw as the general's sharp scales cut into his skin. Blood ran down from the corner of his mouth, but he remained standing. Years of military training kept his body rigid and disciplined, despite the burning humiliation that felt worse than any physical pain. The station fell completely silent except for the distant hum of life support systems. Aliens stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. Never before had anyone seen a galactic military officer physically assault a member of another species during a diplomatic meeting. The act was unprecedented, and its implications would be discussed across the galaxy for years to come. Colonel Jin Woo's face turned dark red with rage, but diplomatic protocol demanded restraint. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he struggled to maintain control. "General, that was completely unnecessary and inappropriate," he said through gritted teeth. General Vextar smiled wickedly, enjoying both the physical dominance he had displayed and the attention from the crowd. "The human took it well," he announced to his audience. "Perhaps there is some warrior spirit in these creatures after all. But I doubt it will matter when the real fighting begins." Around them, aliens whispered and pointed. Some laughed at the entertainment, while others looked uncomfortable at the display of cruelty. Recording devices captured every moment, and within minutes the footage would be transmitted to news networks across dozens of worlds. Tae-min wiped blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. His dark eyes never left the general face as he tasted copper and felt the swelling begin. The humiliation burned like acid in his chest, but he said nothing. Military discipline kept him silent, but inside something cold and dangerous began to grow. "We will remember this moment, General Colonel," Jin-woo said quietly. His voice carried a promise that the arrogant Kalarian was too proud to recognize as a threat. The general waved dismissively with one of his forearms. "Remember whatever you wish human. When the time comes for real combat, you will learn the difference between playing soldier on your prim." The video spread through galactic communication networks faster than the fastest starships could travel. Within 6 hours, every major news network in known space was broadcasting the footage of General Vex Tar slapping Captain Tae-min. The recording had been taken from multiple angles by different aliens, and each version showed the humiliation in crystal-clear detail. On the Kalarian homeworld of Kalar Prime, citizens gathered around public viewing screens to watch their military. Hero put the inferior humans in their proper place. Blue-scaled children cheered and clapped as they saw the general demonstrate Kalarian superiority. Adult Kalarians nodded with approval and pride swelling in their chests as they witnessed what they believed was a perfect example of their species' natural dominance. The Kalarian High Council met in emergency session to discuss the diplomatic implications of the incident. The ornate council chamber was filled with the most powerful leaders of their civilization. Ancient generals who had conquered dozens of worlds sat beside brilliant scientists who had developed weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Council leader Morkesh stood at the center of the circular chamber, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of triumph. "My fellow Kalarians," he announced in a voice that echoed off the polished stone walls, "we have achieved a diplomatic victory without firing a single shot. The humans now understand their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. They are a primitive species that must learn to respect their betters." The council members voiced their agreement with a chorus of approving growls and clicks. They believed the incident had been handled perfectly. The humans had been taught a lesson about Kalarian power, and the rest of the galaxy had witnessed what happened to species that dared to challenge their authority. But far across the galaxy on the blue-green world called Earth, a very different reaction was taking place. In the underground command center of Earth Defense Force, Admiral Sora sat in her office watching the humiliation of one of her finest officers for the 20th time. Her hands gripped the edges of her desk so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The Admiral was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that burned with fierce intelligence. She had spent 30 years building Earth military capabilities, from nothing into a force that could defend humanity against any threat. She had trained soldiers who could fight in any environment against any enemy using tactics that no alien civilization had ever encountered. Captain Dae-ho burst through the office doors without waiting for permission to enter. The young soldier was Tae-min's younger brother and the leader of an elite special operations unit known as Ghost Company. His face was red with anger, and his fists were clenched at his sides. "Admiral, we cannot let this stand," he said through gritted teeth. "They have insulted not just my brother, but every human being alive. That general thinks he can humiliate our people and face no consequences for his actions." Admiral Sora turned away from the video screen and faced the angry young captain. Her expression was calm, but there was something dangerous glowing in her dark eyes. "The Kalarians think they understand warfare because they have advanced technology and superior numbers," she said quietly. "They have never faced an enemy like us within." Hours intelligence reports began flooding into Earth Defense Command from human agents stationed throughout the galaxy. The information painted a detailed picture of Kalarian military capabilities, and it was indeed impressive by any standard. Measurement. The Kalarian Empire maintained a standing army of over 50,000 elite warriors. Each soldier was equipped with personal energy shields that could deflect most known weapons. Their plasma rifles could burn through solid steel, and their armor was made from materials that could withstand direct hits from explosive weapons. The Kalarian war fleet consisted of 12 massive battleships, each one over a mile long and capable of destroying entire cities with a single bombardment. Hundreds of smaller vessels provided support and transportation for ground forces. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. Lieutenant He Wan, the top military strategist in Earth Defense Command, studied the intelligence data with the intensity of a scientist examining a fascinating puzzle. She was a brilliant young woman who had graduated at the top of her class from every military academy on Earth. Her specialty was finding weaknesses in seemingly impossible situations. "Admiral," she said, looking up from her computer screen, "their strength is also their weakness. They rely entirely on technology and conventional tactics. They have no experience with asymmetrical warfare." The Admiral leaned forward with interest. "What do you mean? Every battle the Kalarians have ever fought has followed the same pattern," He Wan explained. "They use overwhelming firepower and superior technology to crush their enemies in direct confrontation. They have never faced an opponent who refused to fight conventionally." Admiral Sora smiled for the first time since watching the humiliation video. "What do you recommend?" "We give them exactly what they expect," He Wan replied. "A demonstration of human military capability, but not the kind they are prepared for." The plan that emerged from that meeting would change galactic history forever. Earth Defense Command began mobilizing its most elite special operations units. Soldiers who had trained in the mountains of Korea, the jungles of South America, and the deserts of Africa received classified briefings about a mission that would determine humanity's future among the stars. Major Kyung-min was called back from a training exercise in the Arctic where he had been teaching survival techniques to new recruits. The veteran soldier had spent 15 years perfecting the art of unconventional warfare. He could survive in any environment, move without being detected, and strike targets that seemed impossible to reach. Sergeant Boram received her orders while conducting urban warfare training in a mock city built specifically for special operations exercises. She was an expert in explosives and sabotage who could turn any environment into a weapon against her enemies. Her small frame and quiet demeanor hid skills that made her one of the most dangerous soldiers on Earth. All across the planet, similar scenes played out as Earth's finest warriors were selected for the mission. These soldiers had been trained not just in combat, but in thinking differently about warfare itself. They understood that victory did not always go to the side with the best weapons or the most advanced technology. While Earth military prepared for what was coming, the Kalarians continued their celebrations. General Vextar became a hero throughout the Empire. Statues were erected in his honor, and children were taught songs about his brave stand against the inferior humans. The general himself basked in the attention and praise. He gave interviews to news networks across the galaxy, explaining how the humans had needed to be taught their proper place. He described them as weak, primitive creatures who would never amount to anything in galactic society, but the general was making a critical error that would soon cost him everything. He was judging human capabilities based on their technology and conventional military strength. He had no understanding of how humans actually fought when their backs were against the wall. Human warfare had been shaped by thousands of years of conflict on a world where survival often depended on cunning rather than strength. Humans had learned to use terrain weather and psychology as weapons. They had developed tactics that turned disadvantages into advantages and weaknesses into strengths. The Kalarians had conquered their enemies through technological superiority and overwhelming force. They had never faced an opponent who fought back using methods their advanced civilization could not comprehend or counter. 3 days after the humiliation, Admiral Sora stood in the main communications center of Earth Defense Command. Around her, dozens of technicians monitored signals from across the galaxy. The room hummed with activity as Earth prepared to send a message that would shock the entire galactic community. The message was addressed personally to General Vex Tar, and it was broadcast on frequencies that would ensure every major civilization received a copy. The words were simple and direct, but they carried implications that would echo through history. General Vex Tar, the message began, "You have insulted the honor of humanity and assaulted one of our officers during a diplomatic meeting. We formally challenge your military forces to demonstrate the superiority you claim to possess." The challenge continued with terms that seemed impossible to believe. The humans were offering to fight the entire Calarian military machine. They would allow the general to choose any world, any battlefield, and any rules of engagement. There would be no restrictions on weapons or tactics. When the message reached Kalar Prime, General Vex Tar read it 3 times before he could believe what he was seeing. The arrogance of these primitive creatures was beyond comprehension. They actually wanted to fight the mighty Calarian Empire in open warfare. The general laughed until tears ran down his scaled cheeks. This would be the most entertaining massacre in galactic history. The humans had just volunteered to provide the galaxy with a demonstration of what happened to species that dared to challenge Calarian supremacy. He immediately accepted the challenge and chose the world of Nexus 7 for the battlefield. It was a barren planet used for military training exercises with harsh terrain and extreme weather conditions. The environment would provide. General Vex Tar stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Crimson Conquest, as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the world of Nexus 7. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see the barren planet below spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The world looked exactly as he remembered it from previous training exercises: harsh rocky terrain with no vegetation and extreme weather patterns that would test any military force. The general smiled with satisfaction as he watched his war fleet take positions around the planet. 12 massive battleships hung in orbit like metal predators waiting to strike. Each vessel bristled with enough weapons to level entire cities, and their shields could withstand attacks from any known enemy. Smaller ships carried troops and supplies, while fighter craft patrolled the space around the fleet. "This is perfect," the general said to his second-in-command, Commander Zach Vell. "The humans will have nowhere to hide and no advantages to exploit. When they arrive, we will demonstrate what real military power looks like." Commander Zach Vell nodded with approval as he studied tactical displays showing Calarian forces deploying across the planet's surface. 50,000 elite warriors were taking positions in a defensive perimeter that covered every possible landing zone. Energy barriers protected their bases, while automated defense systems scanned the skies for any approaching enemies. The Calarian soldiers were confident and relaxed as they established their positions. They had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and centuries of military experience. Many of them joked about how quickly the battle would end when the primitive humans finally arrived. Sergeant Cole Theck checked his plasma rifle for the 10th time that morning and laughed with his squad mates. "I wonder if the humans will even show up," he said to the warriors around him. "Maybe they realized how stupid their challenge was and decided to hide on their mudball planet instead." The other soldiers joined in his laughter. They had all seen the footage of General Vex Tar slapping the human officer, and they believed it. Perfectly demonstrated the weakness of the inferior species. How could creatures so small and fragile possibly threaten the mighty Calarian Empire? But while the Calarian forces joked and prepared for what they expected to be an easy victory, something was moving in the shadows of Nexus 7 rocky landscape. Small groups of figures in strange camouflage crept through canyons and ravines, completely invisible to the advanced sensors that the aliens relied upon. Captain Tae-min crouched behind a boulder formation that provided perfect concealment from Calarian observation posts. His face still bore faint bruises from the humiliation he had suffered, but his eyes burned with cold determination. Around him, 8 other Special Operations soldiers waited silently for orders. These were not ordinary human soldiers. Each member of Ghost Team had been selected from the elite units of Earth Defense Force. They had trained in every environment on Earth and mastered combat techniques that no alien civilization had ever encountered. More importantly, they had been on Nexus 7 for 2 weeks already studying Kalarian positions and preparing for what was about to begin. Ghost Leader to all teams, Time-In whispered into his communication device. Report status. The responses came back one by one from teams scattered across the planet's surface. Ghost 2 in position, led by Captain Daeho. Ghost 3 ready for operations under Major Kyung Min. Ghost 4 standing by with Sergeant Boram commanding. 12 teams in total, each one positioned to strike at critical Kalarian installations. The human infiltration had been a masterpiece of stealth and planning. While the Kalarians prepared for conventional warfare, the humans had used techniques developed during centuries of guerrilla conflict on Earth. They moved at night, avoided all electronic surveillance, and used natural terrain features to remain completely undetected. Human intelligence had identified the weaknesses in Kalarian military doctrine weeks before the challenge was even issued. The aliens relied heavily on technology and conventional tactics. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight by their rules or used methods their advanced sensors could not detect. Tae-Min studied the Kalarian communication relay station through his scope. The facility was protected by 8 elite warriors, equipped with personal shields and plasma weapons. According to their tactical doctrine, they were positioned to repel any frontal assault, but they had never considered the possibility of an attack that would come from directions their training had not prepared them for. All teams, execute Phase 1, he whispered into his radio. Across the planet, 12 human special operations teams began the first stage of their campaign simultaneously. The attacks were coordinated with precision timing that would have impressed any military strategist, but the Kalarians had no idea what was happening because their enemies used methods that their technology could not detect or counter. Ghost Team approached the communication station from 4 different directions, moving through rocky terrain that provided natural concealment. The Kalarian guards were alert and professional, but they were watching for enemies that would attack according to conventional military doctrine. The human assault began with explosive charges placed on the station power generators. When the explosions disabled the facility, electrical systems, the Kalarian soldiers found themselves fighting in darkness against enemies they could not see. Their energy shields failed without power, and their plasma weapons became useless without targeting systems. Flash. Bang grenades exploded among the confused guards, filling the air with blinding light and deafening noise. Before the Kalarians could recover, human soldiers emerged from concealment using weapons and tactics their enemies had never encountered before. The humans carried projectile weapons that fired metal bullets instead of energy beams. The Kalarian personal shields had been designed to deflect plasma and laser attacks, but they provided no protection against solid projectiles traveling at high velocity. The alien warriors fell one by one as human bullets found their targets with deadly precision. Within 5 minutes, the communication station was completely destroyed and its guards were prisoners. The human team vanished back into the rocky landscape, leaving only wreckage and unconscious enemies behind. The entire operation had been conducted in complete silence without alerting any other Kalarian positions. Similar scenes played out across Nexus 7 as human teams struck at supply depots, sensor stations, and isolated outposts. Each attack followed the same pattern, swift, violent, and completely unexpected. The humans used Earth-based weapons and tactics that Kalarian technology was not designed to counter. Major Kyung Min led his team against a supply convoy carrying ammunition and energy cells for plasma weapons. The Kalarian vehicles were heavily armored and protected by a full squad of elite warriors, but their defensive positions were designed to repel frontal attacks. The humans struck from above, using repelling techniques learned in mountain warfare training. They dropped from cliff faces onto the convoy route and attacked with coordinated precision that overwhelmed the surprised guards. Explosive charges disabled the vehicles while projectile weapons neutralized the escorts. The psychological effect was devastating. The Kalarian soldiers had been trained to fight enemies who used similar technology and tactics. They expected their opponents to announce their presence with energy weapon discharges and to attack from predictable directions. Instead, they found themselves fighting phantoms who appeared without warning and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. Sergeant Boram, specializing in sabotage and explosives, led her team against a major weapons depot that supplied an entire sector of Kalarian forces. The facility was surrounded by energy barriers and protected by automated defense systems that could detect and destroy any approaching enemy. But the humans did not approach the facility directly. Instead, they tunneled underneath it, using techniques developed for urban warfare on Earth. The Kalarian sensors were designed to detect aerial and surface threats, but they had no capability to monitor underground movement. The sabotage operation took 3 days to complete as human engineers carefully placed explosive charges throughout the underground storage areas. When the demolition was finally triggered, the resulting explosion could be seen from orbit as the entire weapons depot disappeared in a massive fireball. By the end of the first day, General Vextar was receiving reports of attacks across the entire planet. His confident army was in chaos as supply lines were cut. Communication networks were disrupted and isolated units were being captured or destroyed by enemies they could not detect or engage. "How many humans are there?" the general demanded as he stared at tactical displays showing red markers indicating lost units scattered across Nexus 7. "We do not know, Sir Commander," Zachvel replied nervously. "Our sensors cannot detect them. They appear, strike, and vanish like phantoms. It is unlike any form of warfare we have ever encountered. The Kalarian military machine that had conquered dozens of worlds was being systematically dismantled by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive and weak. The humans were proving that advanced technology meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight by conventional rules." General Vextar pride was beginning to crack as reports continued to flood into his command center. The primitive humans were making fools of his elite forces, and news of the third day brought complete chaos to the Kalarian forces on Nexus 7. What had begun as isolated incidents had escalated into a full-scale guerrilla campaign that the technologically superior aliens were completely unprepared to handle. The pride of the Kalarian military was being systematically destroyed by enemies they could not see, find, or fight using conventional methods. Major Kyung-min crouched in the smoking ruins of what had been Kalarian Forward Operating Base Delta just 6 hours earlier. The massive facility had housed 300 elite warriors and contained enough military equipment to supply a small army. Now it was nothing more than twisted metal and scattered debris smoking in the thin atmosphere of the barren planet. The base had been protected by multiple layers of defense, including energy barriers, automated weapon systems, and constant patrols of heavily armed soldiers. According to every tactical manual in the Kalarian military, it should have been impossible to assault such a fortified position without massive casualties and overwhelming firepower, but the humans had not assaulted the base in any conventional sense. Instead, they had used the Kalarians' own equipment against them, turning the facility defensive systems into weapons of destruction. A small team of human engineers had infiltrated the base power grid and reprogrammed the automated defenses to target Kalarian soldiers instead of protecting them. The attack had begun at dawn when the base defense systems suddenly turned on their own forces. Plasma cannons that should have protected the perimeter started firing at Kalarian positions, while energy barriers collapsed, leaving the soldiers exposed and confused. In the chaos that followed, human special operations teams struck from multiple directions, using the confusion to eliminate organized resistance. Kyung-min studied the tactical situation through his field glasses. Scattered groups of Calarian survivors were hiding throughout the ruined complex, but they had no communication with their command structure and no functioning equipment. Most importantly, they had no idea where the next attack would come from, or how to defend against enemies who fought unlike anything in their experience. "Ghost leader to all teams," he whispered into his tactical radio. "Primary objectives complete. Calarian military infrastructure has been reduced by 60%. Begin Phase 3 operations." Across the planet, human special operations teams received the order and began the final phase of their campaign. They had spent days systematically dismantling the Calarian military machine by attacking supply lines, communication networks, and isolated units. Now it was time to demonstrate that psychological warfare could be just as devastating as any physical weapon. Captain Day-Ho led his team toward the main Calarian command base, where General Vextar and his remaining forces had retreated behind their strongest defenses. The facility was a fortress built into the side of a mountain and protected by energy shields powerful enough to deflect orbital bombardment. Over 1,000 elite warriors guarded the approaches, while automated defense systems monitored every possible avenue of attack. But the humans did not intend to assault the base directly. Instead, they began a campaign of harassment and terror that would push the Calarians beyond their breaking point. The aliens had never experienced warfare that targeted their minds as much as their bodies. The harassment began with sniper fire from concealed positions scattered throughout the mountainous terrain surrounding the base. Human marksmen using projectile weapons picked off Calarian sentries and patrol leaders from distances that made return fire impossible. The energy shields that protected individual soldiers were useless against bullets fired from weapons the aliens could not detect. Sergeant Boram positioned her team in a cave system that provided perfect concealment while offering clear sight lines to the main base. Her specialty was long-range precision shooting, and she had spent years perfecting techniques that made her one of the deadliest snipers on Earth. The Calarian soldiers below had no idea that death was watching them through a scope from over a kilometer away. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Calarian guards began dying without warning as invisible enemies struck from impossible distances. The alien soldiers tried to respond, but their energy weapons were ineffective at such long ranges, and their sensors could not detect human snipers using natural camouflage and concealment techniques. Panic spread through the Calarian ranks as soldiers realized they were being hunted by enemies they could not see or fight. Guard posts were abandoned as terrified warriors retreated behind the strongest barriers they could find. Patrols refused to venture outside the main defensive perimeter, leaving entire sections of the base undefended. But the sniper attacks were only the beginning. Human sabotage teams began infiltrating the outer defenses, using tunnel systems they had carved through the mountain rock over the previous weeks. The Calarians had never considered the possibility that enemies might literally go underground, to bypass their advanced sensors and energy barriers. Explosive charges began detonating throughout the base defensive systems. Power generators failed, communication arrays went offline, and automated weapons malfunctioned as human engineers systematically destroyed the technological advantages that the Calarians relied upon. Each explosion spread more fear and confusion through the alien forces. The Calarian soldiers fired desperately at shadows and sounds, their plasma weapons lighting up the night sky as they shot at targets that existed only in their terrified imaginations. Their advanced sensors detected nothing, but the psychological pressure was driving them to see enemies everywhere. Major Kyung-min observed the chaos from a concealed position overlooking the main base. The proud Calarian military machine was falling apart as psychological warfare stripped away their confidence and discipline. These aliens had never faced an enemy that understood how fear could be used as a weapon more powerful than any plasma rifle or energy cannon. Communication. Jamming prevented coordination between different units, turning the organized Calarian force into scattered groups of frightened soldiers. Human specialists, using Earth-based electronic warfare techniques, disrupted every frequency the aliens tried to use. The Calarians found themselves fighting blind and deaf against enemies who seemed to know their every move. General Vextar stood in his fortified command center, watching tactical displays that showed his proud army disintegrating before his eyes. Red indicators marked destroyed facilities, compromised positions, and units that had simply disappeared. In just 3 days, the humans had reduced his elite force to a demoralized rabble hiding behind whatever defenses they could find. "Sir, we are receiving a communication from the human forces." Commander Zach Vell reported, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. The main display screen activated, showing the face of Admiral Sora. The human admiral looked calm and professional, but there was steel in her dark eyes that made even the towering Calarian general step backward. Behind her stood Captain Tamin, the officer that General Vextar had humiliated at the space station days earlier. General Vextar Admiral So-Ra spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the command center. "You wanted to see what human military capability looks like. Are you satisfied with the demonstration?" The general's scaled face flushed with rage and humiliation as he realized that his technological superiority meant nothing against enemies who refused to fight by his rules. "You fight. Like cowards," he snarled. "Like assassins, hiding in shadows. This is not honorable warfare honor." Captain Tamin stepped forward, his voice cutting through the transmission like a blade. "You spoke of honor when you struck an unarmed officer during a diplomatic meeting. You want to see honorable warfare? Then meet us in open combat." The transmission continued with terms that would echo across galactic history. The humans challenged the remaining Calarian forces to single combat between champions. If the Calarians won, humanity would withdraw from galactic society in shame and never again claim equality with advanced civilizations. If the humans won, General Vextar would publicly apologize for his insult and acknowledge that he had underestimated human military capability. General Vextar agreed immediately. Despite everything that had happened, he still believed in Calarian superiority over the primitive humans. In single combat with equal weapons and no guerrilla tactics, his champion would crush any human warrior. The technological advantages might be neutralized, but Calarian physical superiority would prove decisive. The duel was scheduled for dawn in the center of what had once been the Calarians' most secure military installation. Now the base was a smoking ruin, surrounded by evidence of human tactical superiority. But the general convinced himself that individual combat would restore his species' honor. He chose Champion Korthak, the finest warrior in the Calarian Empire. The massive fighter had never lost a duel and had defeated opponents from dozens of different species. His 4 arms could wield weapons with deadly precision, while his natural armor provided protection against most attacks. But as the Calarian champion prepared for battle, the human forces were making their own preparations. The single combat would not just determine the outcome of this conflict, but would establish how humanity would be viewed by every civilization in the galaxy for generations to come. The sun rose over Nexus 7 like a blood-red eye, casting long shadows across the devastated battlefield that had once been the pride of Calarian military engineering. The main command base lay in ruins with twisted metal and scattered debris, marking the places where advanced alien technology had been systematically destroyed by human ingenuity and determination. In the center of the destruction, a circular area had been cleared for the most important single combat in galactic history. The ground was level and free of obstacles, while energy barriers created by the few remaining Calarian generators formed walls around the makeshift arena. This would be the stage where 2 warriors would fight to determine the fate of species and the future of human civilization among the stars. Champion Korthak stood at one end of the circle, preparing for battle with the ritual precision that had made him legendary throughout the Calarian Empire. The massive warrior was 7 feet tall with blue scales that gleamed like polished metal in the morning light. His forearms moved in complex patterns as he tested his plasma sword, the energy weapon humming with deadly power. The champion had never lost a duel in 20 years of combat. His body bore scars from battles against warriors from dozens of different species, but he had emerged victorious from every encounter. His natural armor could deflect most weapons, while his superior reach and multiple limbs gave him overwhelming advantages in close combat. Around him, the surviving Kalarian forces watched with desperate hope. Their mighty army had been reduced to fewer than 500 terrified soldiers hiding behind whatever defenses they could improvise. Their advanced technology had proven useless against human tactics, and their pride lay in ruins along with their military installations. Everything now depended on their champion proving that Kalarian physical superiority could overcome human cunning. If Korthak won, the humans would be forced to acknowledge their inferior status and withdraw from galactic society in shame. The humiliation of the past 3 days would be forgotten as the galaxy witnessed Kalarian dominance restored. At the other end of the arena, Captain Taemin prepared for the fight that would define his species' future among the stars. The human warrior looked almost fragile compared to his massive opponent, standing barely 6 feet tall and armed with nothing more than a simple metal blade. He wore basic combat fatigues without any advanced armor or technological enhancements. But appearances could be deceiving. Taemin had been trained by the finest military instructors on Earth in combat techniques developed through thousands of years of human warfare. He had fought in the mountains of Korea, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and the urban battlegrounds of the Middle East. His skills had been tested against human opponents who fought with desperate cunning born from a lifetime of conflict on the most dangerous planet in known space. Behind him, Captain Daeho and the other human special operations soldiers watched in silence. They had complete confidence in their comrade abilities, but they understood the enormous pressure he faced. The outcome of this duel would determine whether humanity would be accepted as equals by galactic civilization or dismissed as primitive creatures unworthy of respect. Between the two warriors stood General Vex Tar, who would serve as the official judge of combat. Despite his army devastating defeat, he remained confident that single combat would restore Kalarian honor. The humans might have superior tactics, but they could never match Kalarian physical strength and natural fighting ability. The terms are simple. The general announced, his voice carrying across the silent battlefield. Single combat to submission or death. No weapons except those carried by the fighters. No assistance from outside forces. The victor species will be acknowledged as superior by the defeated. Taemin nodded calmly, his grip steady on his metal sword. The weapon was a masterpiece of human craftsmanship, forged from the finest steel and balanced to perfection. It had no energy field or technological enhancements, but it had been designed by warriors who understood that sometimes the simplest tools were the most effective. Champion Korthak raised his plasma sword and activated its energy field. The weapon blazed with contained fire that could cut through solid metal or burn flesh to ash with a single touch. He smiled with confidence as he contemplated the easy victory that awaited him. The duel began with explosive violence as Korthak launched himself forward with all 4 arms moving in a complex attack pattern designed to overwhelm any opponent. His plasma sword left burning trails in the air as he pressed his assault using centuries of Kalarian combat techniques refined through countless victories. But Taemin had studied recordings of Kalarian fighting methods during the weeks of preparation for this mission. He understood how the aliens moved and could predict their attack patterns. More importantly, he had been trained in asymmetrical combat by instructors who specialized in defeating larger, stronger opponents. The human warrior moved like flowing water, dodging around Korthak attacks and striking at vulnerable points with surgical precision. His metal blade found gaps in the Kalarian natural armor, drawing blue blood and causing pain that the champion had rarely experienced in his career of easy victories. The fight continued for 20 minutes with both warriors testing each other's strengths and weaknesses. Korthak's superior reach and multiple arms gave him significant advantages, but Taimin training in guerrilla combat allowed him to turn every advantage against his opponent. When the Galarian pressed close for powerful strikes, the human used his smaller size to attack from unexpected angles. When Korthak tried to use his plasma sword energy discharge, Taimin metal blade conducted the energy harmlessly away. The human had been trained to fight enemies with superior technology, and he knew how to neutralize technological advantages through superior technique. The watching aliens began to murmur with concern as they realized that their champion was not dominating the fight as expected. The primitive human was holding his own against the finest warrior in the Galarian Empire, using nothing more than skill, determination, and a simple metal weapon. Korthak began to feel something he had never experienced before in combat: genuine fear. This small human was unlike any opponent he had ever faced. The creature fought with a combination of precision and unpredictability that made it impossible to pin down or defeat using conventional techniques. The Galarian champion increased the intensity of his attacks, pouring all his strength and experience into overwhelming assaults that should have ended the duel immediately. But every attack was deflected or avoided as the human warrior flowed around his strikes like smoke. Frustration began to cloud Korthak's judgment as the fight stretched beyond anything he had expected. He had planned to end this quickly with a demonstration of Galarian superiority, but instead found himself locked in genuine combat with an opponent who refused to be intimidated or overwhelmed. The tide turned when Korthak made a critical error born from desperation and wounded pride. Determined to end the fight with a single devastating blow, he committed all four arms to a massive overhead attack that concentrated his entire strength into one strike. Taimin had been waiting for exactly this moment. He stepped inside the attack, moving closer to his opponent instead of retreating as the Galarian expected. His metal blade found the gap between Korthak's chest plates and pierced the champion heart with surgical precision. The plasma sword fell silent as Korthak collapsed, his yellow eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The finest warrior in the Galarian Empire had been defeated by a human, using nothing more than skill training and determination. The impossible had become reality before the eyes of witnesses from across the galaxy. The battlefield fell completely silent, except for the wind blowing through the ruins of what had been the mightiest military installation in Galarian space. Alien soldiers stared in stunned disbelief as their strongest champion lay dead at the feet of a human they had dismissed as primitive and weak. General Vextar looked down at his fallen champion with expressions of shock and growing horror. Everything he believed about Galarian superiority had just been proven false by a warrior who carried a simple metal sword and fought with techniques no advanced civilization had ever encountered. Taimin cleaned his blade calmly and faced the alien general. "The duel is complete," he said quietly. "Honor the terms of our agreement." What followed was broadcast across the galaxy and became one of the most famous scenes in the history of interspecies contact. General Vextar, the proud Galarian military. 6 months after the humiliation at the trading station, Captain Taimin, now Major Taimin, stood on the observation deck of Earth's newest starship, the EDS Retribution, watching as diplomatic vessels from across the galaxy approached for the historic signing ceremony. The sleek human warship hung in orbit above Earth like a symbol of humanity arrival as a major power in galactic politics. The irony was not lost on him that the same species which had been dismissed as primitive creatures was now hosting one of the most important diplomatic gatherings in recent galactic history. Representatives from over 50 different civilizations had traveled to Earth to sign trade agreements, military partnerships, and mutual defense treaties with the humans who had proven their worth through strength. Through the massive viewing windows, Major Taimin could see ships of every conceivable design approaching Earth orbit. The elegant silver vessels of the Andromedian Trade Federation moved alongside the crystalline constructs of the Silicon Brotherhood, while the biomechanical ships of the Hive Collective maintained careful distances from the energy beings who traveled in pure light. All of these advanced civilizations had come to Earth for one reason: they wanted to establish relationships with the species that had defeated the Calarian Empire using tactics and strategies that no one had ever encountered before. The galaxy had learned that technological superiority meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight by conventional rules. Admiral Sora joined him at the viewing window wearing the dress uniform that had been specially designed for this historic occasion. The small woman who had planned humanity's greatest military victory looked tired but satisfied as she watched the approaching diplomatic fleet. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" she asked quietly, referring to the slap that had started everything 6 months earlier. Major Taemin touched his cheek where General Vextar had struck him during that first humiliating encounter. The physical bruises had healed within days, but the memory remained as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "Sometimes the smallest actions have the largest consequences," he replied. That general thought he was demonstrating superiority, but he actually gave us the motivation to prove him wrong. The signing ceremony took place in the main conference hall of the orbital station that had been constructed specifically for this event. The chamber was enormous, with seating for delegates from dozens of different species and translation equipment that could handle over 200 different languages simultaneously. At the center of the room stood a circular table made from rare Earth materials that had been polished to mirror perfection. Around this table sat the most powerful beings in known space, all of them eager to formalize their relationships with humanity. Chancellor Morven of the Galactic Trade Council stood to address the assembly. The tall, elegant alien had initially been skeptical about human capabilities, but the events on Nexus 7 had completely changed his perspective on Earth potential as a galactic partner. Fellow delegates, he began his translation device, converting his words into dozens of different languages. Simultaneously, we gather today to welcome humanity into the community of advanced civilizations. Their recent demonstration of military capability has proven that they possess qualities that our galaxy desperately needs. The Chancellor continued his speech by outlining the various agreements that would be signed during the ceremony. Trade partnerships that would give Earth access to advanced technologies in exchange for human expertise in unconventional warfare. Military alliances that would allow human special forces to serve alongside alien armies in conflicts across the galaxy. Cultural exchange programs that would spread human tactical innovations to species that had never encountered such methods. But the most significant moment came when General Vextar himself entered the conference hall. The proud Calarian leader looked older and more humble than he had 6 months earlier. His golden armor had been replaced with simple robes, and his forearms moved with none of the arrogant confidence he had displayed during their first meeting. The general approached Major Taemin and bowed deeply in a gesture of respect that was witnessed by representatives from across the galaxy. "Your species has taught mine a valuable lesson about the nature of true strength," he said quietly. "We believed that advanced technology made us superior, but you have shown us that courage, skill, and determination are far more important qualities." Major Taemin accepted the apology with grace and dignity that impressed every alien observer present. The human warrior who had been publicly humiliated was now demonstrating the kind of leadership that would make his species valuable partners rather than conquered subjects. The ceremony continued with the signing of dozens of different agreements, each one representing a new opportunity for human expansion among the stars. Earth scientists would work alongside alien researchers to develop new technologies. Human soldiers would train alien forces in guerrilla warfare and unconventional tactics. Human explorers would join expeditions to uncharted regions of the galaxy. But perhaps the most important moment came when the Galactic Military Council formally invited Earth Defense Force to join their organization as a full member with voting rights and representation in all major military decisions. The same humans who had been dismissed as primitive creatures 6 months earlier were now being asked to help lead galactic defense efforts. Captain Daeho now, Colonel Daeho stood beside his brother as the signing ceremony reached its conclusion. The younger officer had been promoted after leading successful operations during the Nexus 7 campaign and was now in command of the newly formed Human Special Operations Command. "Do you think we are ready for all this?" he asked quietly as they watched alien delegates celebrating the historic agreements. Major Taman smiled as he remembered the long journey that had brought them to this moment. From the humiliation at the trading station, to the guerrilla campaign on Nexus 7, to the single combat that had changed galactic history forever. "We have been ready for this, our entire lives," he replied. "We just needed someone to give us the opportunity to prove it." In the months that followed the signing ceremony, human influence spread across the galaxy at an unprecedented rate. Earth military advisors were stationed on dozens of worlds teaching alien forces how to fight unconventionally. Human traders established commercial relationships that brought advanced technologies to Earth while spreading human culture throughout known space. The Special Operations Command became one of the most respected military units in the galaxy as human soldiers proved their effectiveness in conflicts that had previously seemed impossible to resolve. Their tactics were studied in military academies on hundreds of worlds, and their methods became standard doctrine for asymmetrical warfare. But the most lasting change was in how humanity was perceived by other species. The days of being dismissed as primitive creatures were over forever. Earth had earned its place among the stars through strength, courage, and the willingness to fight for respect, rather than simply accepting whatever treatment they received. General Vextar, who had once boasted about Calarian superiority, became one of humanity's strongest supporters in the Galactic Council. He spent his remaining years working to establish better relationships between species and warning other civilizations about the dangers of judging others based on appearances or technology levels. The slap that had humiliated Major Tamin became known throughout the galaxy as the Catalyst Incident, the moment when humanity decided to prove their worth rather than accept inferior treatment. Military historians would study the events that followed for centuries, using them as examples of how determination and tactical innovation could overcome any technological disadvantage. Major Tai Min eventually retired from military service and became Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. He spent decades working to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had led to conflict with the Calarians and helping other species learn to respect diversity rather than fear it. The storm of retribution that had begun with a single act of violence had transformed into something far more important, a foundation for lasting peace and cooperation among the stars. Humanity had proven that they belonged in galactic society, not as subjects or junior partners, but as equals who brought unique strengths to the community of intelligent species. The galaxy was a larger and more dangerous place than humans had ever imagined, but it was also full of opportunities for those brave enough to seize them. Earth children would grow up knowing that the stars were not distant lights in the sky, but destinations waiting to be explored by those with courage, determination, and the wisdom to fight for what they believed was right. The lesson echoed across space and time in the words that became humanity's unofficial motto among the stars. Underestimating humans was indeed a fatal mistake, but earning their respect opened doorways to possibilities that no single species could ever achieve alone.